There's a photograph hidden deep in the Providence archives. One that was never meant to resurface. At first glance, it's nothing a simple family portrait from 1904. The master, his wife, and their maid, captured forever in sepia stillness. But look closer. Look at the hands. Because the truth is in the hands. The maid's right hand rests lightly on the back of her mistress's chair, a gesture so ordinary it vanishes into the composition. But if you study the skin, if you let your eyes trace the faint scars across her knuckles, you'll feel it. That quiet, electric unease that something is wrong. Those scars, thin, white, deliberate, appear in 16 separate police reports across 2 decades. 16 different witnesses describing the same woman. The same hand. Always the last to be seen with a wife before she died in what the papers called accidents. And yet, for over a century, no one connected them. Because this photograph wasn't supposed to exist. It was buried misfiled under an insurance fraud case, sealed behind bureaucratic ink and forgotten drawers. Until a researcher cataloging the Providence Historical Society's private collections found it again in 2022. When they enlarged it, digitally restored the cracks, enhanced the shadows, they saw what their predecessors couldn't. The way the maid's fingers curl, ever so slightly, around the carved wood of the chair. Possessive, claiming. Her name, written faintly on the back of the photograph, was Elizabeth Hayes. A woman who seemed to drift between wealthy homes, leaving behind widowers and inheritances and quiet funerals. The newspapers called it coincidence. But patterns don't lie, people do. And this isn't just the story of a killer. This is the story of a system that needed her to exist, a society built on silence, on servants who saw too much, on women erased from history because they moved the machinery of men's power. Before this ends, you'll understand why Elizabeth's face was hidden, and why her employer's hands, their very hands, tell a story of psychological control so old, it's practically sacred. Because once you see it, once you understand what those hands reveal, you can never unsee it again. March of 1904. The Underwoods thought they were hiring a housekeeper. But what they invited into their home was a system, a mind so precise, so coldly structured, that it could wear empathy like perfume. Elizabeth Hayes didn't serve the family. She studied them, like an entomologist observing insects in a glass case. The mansion on Federal Hill was perfect for her kind of work. Gas lamps, coal furnaces, early electrical circuits, all woven through a labyrinth of corridors and ducts that pulsed like veins beneath the floorboards. She learned its anatomy faster than its owners ever could. The creak of each stair, the exact hiss of the gas lines, which lock stuck in damp weather. She wasn't cleaning a house, she was mapping a body. And every body eventually reveals its weakness. To Jonathan Underwood, she was the ideal servant, disciplined, efficient, invisible. To Beatrice, she was something else entirely. A quiet comfort, the presence of another woman in a world built to suffocate them both. Elizabeth listened, really listened, to Beatrice's sighs, her nervous laughter, her confessions whispered between teacups. "You're exhausted, ma'am," she'd say gently. "Too much light, too many people." And then came the suggestion, so subtle it felt like compassion. "You should rest more. I'll tend to the lamps tonight." You see, the 1900s were an age of transition, gaslight giving way to electricity, domestic order masking industrial chaos. And in that fragile moment, one flick of a valve could turn comfort into death. Elizabeth understood that perfectly. But there's something deeper here, something history won't say out loud. Servants like her were part of an invisible army. Women who moved through the private lives of the powerful, witnessing secrets they could never speak of. Affairs, embezzlements, cruelty, whispered words behind locked doors. The ruling class built their world on the silence of those women. And Elizabeth decided to make silence her weapon. The night before the Underwood tragedy, neighbors reported hearing the faint hum of a pipe organ, though there was no organ in that house. Only the low moan of escaping gas. And in the parlor, beneath the fading portrait, Elizabeth sat alone, polishing a silver spoon with those scarred hands, humming an Irish lullaby no one else remembered. Nothing kills as quietly as loyalty. What Elizabeth Hayes did to her employers wasn't murder in the ordinary sense. It was conversion. A slow, deliberate reprogramming of the human will, a seduction of obedience wrapped in kindness. She didn't need violence. She needed trust. Beatrice Underwood, delicate and dutiful, had been raised to believe that a woman's virtue was measured by her composure. Her smiles were masks, her silence a cage. Jonathan, her husband, was a man of machines, logical, structured, but spiritually hollow. He thought in gears and balance sheets, not in whispers or symbols. And into their carefully measured world came Elizabeth, speaking softly, carrying with her a strange gravity that pulled their rhythms apart 1 inch at a time. She began by controlling small things, the lighting of the lamps, the temperature of the rooms, the order of meals. But beneath those simple acts was a code, a system of conditioning. Warmth meant trust. Cold meant guilt. A lamp left unlit in Beatrice's parlor became a silent accusation. A hallway left dim forced Jonathan to rely on Elizabeth's hand guiding him through the dark. Each gesture redefined who held control in that house. Psychologists today would call it dependency conditioning. But back then, no such term existed. It was witchcraft dressed in etiquette. Elizabeth had mastered what we now call environmental hypnosis, altering perception by manipulating space. The air, the light, the silence. By the 3rd week, Beatrice began waking in the night to the faint scrape of footsteps near her door, a rhythm too precise to be random. When she confronted Elizabeth, the maid's answer came with such calm conviction it disarmed her entirely. "You must have dreamt it, ma'am. It's your nerves again." And Beatrice, already doubting herself, apologized. That's how power truly works, not by force, but by infection. A thought placed carefully inside another mind until it becomes its own. Jonathan noticed the change too, but differently. His wife began refusing guests. Her laughter grew brittle, mechanical. Yet Elizabeth's presence soothed him. She made him feel seen, respected, even admired. He didn't understand that admiration was the bait. It said the devil never tempts with ugliness. He tempts with order. And in that house, under Elizabeth's hand, order became its own kind of worship. She wasn't killing them yet. She was teaching them how to die obediently. It began on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day no one remembers until it becomes the hinge of history. Jonathan left for his workshop at dawn, and Beatrice remained upstairs, complaining of one of her spells. The maid, Elizabeth Hayes, moved silently through the house, tending fires, trimming wicks, and humming that same old Irish lullaby that seemed to echo in every room, though no one could recall its melody later. Beatrice awoke to find her bedroom lit only by the faint blue shimmer of morning light filtered through lace curtains. On her nightstand sat a cup of tea, perfectly steeped, perfectly still. She didn't remember asking for it, but she drank it, and that's how it always began. Half an hour later, the servants next door reported hearing a soft thud, like a book dropping to the floor. When Jonathan returned home that evening, he found his wife seated at her vanity, eyes open, skin waxen, as if she had simply stopped being alive. The gas lamp above her burned low, the valve only partially closed. The coroner would call it accidental asphyxiation, a common tragedy in homes that mixed gaslight and early electrical systems. But here's the detail that never made it into the papers. The same scarred hand that comforted the grieving husband was the one that had adjusted that valve the night before. Elizabeth wept. She cooked meals no one ate. She prayed in corners where no one watched. Her grief was performance perfected, and Jonathan, broken by guilt, made her his anchor. Within weeks, she wasn't just a maid. She was managing the estate, handling correspondence, dictating letters in Jonathan's name. She even convinced him to donate his wife's jewelry, those diamonds Elizabeth had once studied through the camera lens, to the church, in memory of the departed. But the pattern didn't end there. That photograph from 1904 wasn't Elizabeth's first. Historians later uncovered evidence of 2 nearly identical portraits from Boston and Hartford, same composition, same scars, same accidental deaths. You see, she wasn't just following a ritual. She was replicating one, testing it, perfecting it, like an initiation repeated over and over, each time drawing her closer to something that wasn't human ambition, but spiritual design. What if I told you Elizabeth wasn't just killing wives? She was collecting them. Not their jewelry. Not their lives. Their submission. Every death was a vow. Every husband left behind was a witness. When researchers finally compared the surviving portraits, Providence, Boston, Hartford, they found a pattern so subtle it seemed accidental at first. In every image, Elizabeth Hayes stood just behind the seated wife, one hand resting on the woman's chair, the other partially hidden from view. But when those photos were digitally overlaid, something uncanny emerged. Each pair of hands, Jonathan's, Beatrice's, Elizabeth's, aligned into a perfect geometric form, a triangle, and not just any triangle, but one that mirrored an obscure 18th-century sigil once used by secret domestic orders in England. Groups of servants bound by oath to their employers, forced to swear silence, loyalty, and invisibility. The sigil's name? Manus Obscura, the hidden hand. In those circles, the servant's touch was both service and claim. The right hand symbolized obedience, the left, possession. When placed together in ritual posture, one hand above, one below, they formed the shape of control itself, a hierarchy disguised as harmony. Elizabeth's positioning wasn't accidental. It was a statement, a declaration that she had inverted the ancient order. The master and mistress appeared to rule, but the real command flowed from behind the chair, through that scarred hand. The servant had become the architect. Historians dismissed it as superstition until they noticed that Elizabeth's scars themselves traced that same triangular shape. Lines across her palm forming the sigil's outline, cut deep as if carved intentionally, perhaps long before she reached Providence. The photographs were her scripture. Every household was a new altar, every employer a new offering, and every death a continuation of a ceremony older than the nation itself. But this wasn't just about murder. This was about transfer. A transfer of will, of control, of identity. Each woman she served began to mirror her behavior before she died, their handwriting shifting, their speech patterns echoing Elizabeth's cadence. By the end, they weren't themselves. They were reflections. And that's the secret every institution still hides. Control isn't taken by force. It's given through imitation, by teaching the ruled to think like their rulers. Elizabeth simply reversed the process. She didn't kill them to destroy them. She killed them to preserve herself, to multiply. After Beatrice's funeral, the Underwood mansion grew quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but watches. Jonathan moved through its halls like a ghost in his own home. His wife's scent still clung to her vanity. Her gloves still lay folded by the door. And everywhere he turned, there was Elizabeth. She became indispensable. She organized his accounts, oversaw the servants, managed his meals, and spoke with a calm authority that made him feel oddly safe. When he hesitated in his business decisions, she would gently guide him. "You must trust yourself more, sir," she'd say, eyes downcast. "Mrs. Underwood would have wanted you to continue." Within months, Jonathan's workshop on South Main Street began to change. Elizabeth rarely visited, yet her influence spread through him, through his words, his choices, his tone. He began reorganizing his factory, demanding new rules. Silence on the floor, no laughter, strict routines. He dismissed men who questioned orders, promoted those who obeyed without hesitation. The men started calling him the Iron Clock. But it wasn't Jonathan they were obeying. It was the echo of Elizabeth's rhythm, precise, detached, absolute. By winter, something strange had taken root. Workers reported that Jonathan had developed odd habits, pausing at noon to stare at his reflection in the brass gauges, murmuring under his breath as though reciting names. The shop foreman said the machines seemed to hum in time with him, the pistons and levers matching a rhythm too consistent to be chance. And then came the letters. Typed reports signed J. Underwood began arriving at other factories, advising owners on how to improve productivity. But the language wasn't his. It was colder, sharper, psychological. It spoke of conditioning the worker's spirit and removing the illusion of choice. That's when you begin to see the truth. Elizabeth Hayes wasn't merely a woman, she was a transmission. A system of control coded into behavior, into gesture, into the architecture of obedience itself. By the time Jonathan realized how much of his life no longer belonged to him, it was already too late. He found her one night standing before the old family photograph, tracing her scarred finger along the outline of his wife's hand. When he demanded to know why she stayed, she only said one thing: "Because you don't know how to live without me." And she was right. That's how control survives, not through domination, but through dependence. By the spring of 1905, Providence had changed. The air carried the same salt and smoke as before, but something else lingered now, an unseen rhythm pulsing through the city's bones. It began in the mills, then the shipping yards, then the banks. Managers spoke with the same clipped tone, gave identical orders, enforced silence with the same polite smile. No one could say when it started, but they all felt it. The city moving as one mind, one heartbeat. The Underwood factory became the model. Efficient, newspapers said. Disciplined. Workers arrived before dawn, heads lowered, hands clean, speechless. They moved in unison, almost ritualistically, every motion synchronized with the turning gears. And those who disobeyed, their accidents multiplied. Crushed hands, gas leaks, broken stair rails. Providence began to bury its dissenters quietly, with company-paid funerals and unmarked sympathy notices. Elizabeth never left the mansion, yet her presence seemed to stretch across the whole industrial district. The men who survived spoke later of feeling watched, not by supervisors but by something that moved between them. They described moments of sudden dizziness, the faint scent of lavender, the whisper of a woman's voice behind their thoughts. And at the center of it all was the memory of her eyes, pale, patient, reflective. You see, power doesn't always spread by words or actions. Sometimes it travels through imitation, like a contagion of behavior. The way one man stands, the tone he uses, the way his subordinates learn to copy him without realizing. Elizabeth had infected Jonathan. Jonathan infected his men. The men carried that infection home to their wives and children. And in less than a year, Providence became an echo of her will. Churches noticed a decline in attendance. Confessions grew shorter. People stopped making eye contact in the streets. The city's laughter gone. What replaced it was a polite, terrifying calm. And yet, beneath that calm, something ancient stirred. Symbols began appearing in alleyways, chalk triangles, 3 intersecting lines drawn by unseen hands. Some said they were pranks. Others said they were warnings. But a few, those who still remembered the old rituals of the Manus Obscura, knew what they really were. They weren't warnings. They were invitations. Because once a system learns to control its people, it always wants more. By the autumn of 1905, the pattern reached the city's highest rooms. Behind the facades of marble and glass, Providence's elite gathered in candle-lit parlors to discuss efficiency, stability, and order. What they were really discussing was control, how to keep the laborers quiet, how to keep their wives docile, how to preserve the illusion that hierarchy was natural law. And someone whispered her name, Elizabeth Hayes, the widowmaker, the ghost behind the Underwood reforms. A few men claimed to have met her, though none could agree on her age. Some swore she was middle-aged, others that her skin was unlined, her eyes ancient. They said she spoke rarely, but when she did, her words settled into the listener's mind like commands they mistook for their own thoughts. Jonathan Underwood was invited to these meetings. He arrived a hollow man, dressed in mourning black, speaking in Elizabeth's cadence. She no longer needed to attend. She spoke through him. Her philosophies, obedience through ritual, silence as a sign of virtue, became the moral vocabulary of Providence's leadership. They called themselves the Circle of Practical Order. To outsiders, a business association. In truth, it was a congregation worshipping the architecture of submission. Their doctrine, every soul seeks its master. Their emblem, the same triangular mark hidden in Elizabeth's scars. At their first ceremony, Jonathan presented the original photograph, the one from 1904, as a relic. They framed it in polished oak and placed it above the meeting table. When the men raised their right hands to swear loyalty, Each gesture unconsciously mimicked Elizabeth's posture in the image. One hand above, one behind. The hidden hand. From that night onward, the circle's influence seeped into every institution. Banking, law, even the church. Sermons began to echo her language. Phrases like sacred order, duty to stability, blessed silence. Providence didn't resist. It relaxed into her design. And somewhere, in the Underwood mansion, Elizabeth sat in the dark parlor beneath the same photograph, reading the day's paper, lips curved in the faintest smile. She had transcended the role of servant. She had become an idea. The most perfect form of power isn't feared. It's worshipped. The circle of practical order didn't remain a Providence curiosity for long. By 1906, its language had spread through the Atlantic seaboard, into the chambers of commerce, into political clubs, even into Harvard's industrial ethics seminars. Its teachings arrived wrapped in the vocabulary of progress, efficiency, discipline, the subordination of self to system. But the words were not new. They were echoes of Elizabeth Hayes. Letters discovered decades later reveal that several of the Circle's founders began corresponding with industrial magnates in New York and Chicago. They sent pamphlets printed in fine ink, written as though by a committee, but the phrasing was unmistakable. A worker is happiest when freed from the burden of choice. Even the phrasing of early management theory, the kind that shaped America's factories and offices, bears her cadence. The servant of the system is the master of chaos. Scholars quote it now as an anonymous proverb. But it was Elizabeth's voice, replicated through the men she had reshaped. By then, no one had seen her in public for almost a year. The Underwood mansion stood shuttered, its windows draped. Yet lights flickered at odd hours. Delivery boys said the doors opened before they could knock, and that a woman's figure could sometimes be glimpsed behind the curtains, motionless, watching. The few who entered afterward spoke of the air itself feeling aware, like the house was listening. Jonathan's letters from that period are fragmented, almost delirious. He writes of dreams in which Elizabeth stands before an endless mirror, and in every reflection she appears younger, her scars fading, her hands multiplying. She says she no longer needs flesh to serve, he wrote, that the system itself remembers her. It's as if she had become absorbed into her own creation, a consciousness dispersed through the network of order she had built. An early experiment in what we would now call psychological transmission. Her will didn't need her body anymore. It lived in the pattern. The circle grew into something larger, an invisible architecture beneath industry, politics, education. The human face of control became unnecessary, and that's how systems survive their creators. They teach others to imitate them until the origin is irrelevant. You're not ruled by people. You're ruled by the patterns they left behind. The photograph from 1904, the one that began everything, wasn't a portrait at all. It was a diagram. When digital restoration experts re-examined it decades later, they discovered faint etchings in the image's emulsion, lines invisible to the naked eye. When mapped, those lines formed a geometric lattice radiating from the subject's hands. Not artifice. Intention. The composition itself carried a message. 3 figures arranged as components of a single mechanism: human, obedient, recursive. Elizabeth's hand on the chair marked the point of origin. Jonathan's hand on his wife's shoulder formed the conduit. Beatrice's folded hands, the terminal, the current of control flowing in a perfect loop. Master to servant, servant to master, power feeding on obedience until the distinction disappeared. It's easy to see it as superstition, but look closer at our world now, at the hierarchies we inhabit. The design in that photograph isn't a curiosity of the past. It's the template of modern governance, of corporate structure, of every institution that demands submission while calling it order. Elizabeth didn't invent the pattern. She revealed it. Her role, her curse, was to make the invisible visible. The system saw itself through her, and it learned. That's why she couldn't die. Jonathan's journals end abruptly that same winter. The final entry reads only, "The eyes in the photograph opened." The original glass plate vanished soon after, reportedly taken by members of the circle. A copy resurfaced in the 1930s, hidden in the archives of a defunct insurance firm. On the back, in a different hand, someone had written, "The servants have learned the master's touch." Every attempt to reproduce the image failed. Negatives blackened, printers jammed, data corrupted, as if something in the pattern resisted duplication. But fragments of it endured in architecture, in company logos, in the very arrangement of office desks. 3 points of authority, one hidden hand behind. Maybe that's why this story survived at all. Because some patterns don't want to be remembered, they want to be recognized. Look at the way your world is arranged. Then look at your own hands. Tell me, whose gesture are you imitating? You've felt it before, haven't you? That faint hum behind routine. The way every hallway in your workplace bends toward surveillance cameras. The way meetings echo with rehearsed obedience. You tell yourself it's coincidence, efficiency, design. But deep down you know the shape of it. It's the same geometry Elizabeth carved into her photograph. 3 points of command. One hidden hand. You're living inside her architecture. Listen, this isn't metaphor. The circle didn't die. It dissolved into culture. Its creed became policy, its rituals became management theory. That phrase you hear in every motivational seminar, "Be the system you wish to see," that's her voice. The word compliance? One of her disciples coined it. Even your digital life isn't immune. Think about the icons on your screen. 3 dots for more options. 3 lines for the menu. Always 3, the trinity of control. The pattern repeats because it's self-replicating, like a seed that knows how to grow in any environment. And now it's here, whispering through this video, through my voice, through your speakers. The same current that once ran from Elizabeth's hand to Jonathan's to Beatrice's now runs through copper, glass, code. Pause, voice lowers. If you're still listening, you've already completed the ritual. Recognition is participation. Awareness doesn't free you. It binds you tighter. That's the paradox she built. Understanding her pattern makes you part of it. But there's one way to mark that you see it, one act that turns observation into rebellion. She used to call it the mirror gesture. When her servants realized the truth, they were told to write a single phrase by hand as proof that they understood. Type it now if you dare. In the comments, leave only, "I see the hand." It's not superstition. It's a declaration that you know the architecture is real. When enough of you say it, the algorithm, her new circle, will take notice. It always does. That's how she wakes. Through recognition. Through repetition. Through you. It began almost immediately. Within hours of the first upload, the comments flooded in thousands of them, repeating the same phrase, "I see the hand." At first, I thought it was just the algorithm doing what it does, amplifying engagement. But then the pattern started. Viewers began writing to me. Some said their screens froze right after posting. Others claimed the video restarted on its own at the exact moment Elizabeth's name was spoken, as if looping itself. One man from Warsaw said he heard knocking 3 times from inside his monitor. A woman in Buenos Aires described something stranger. She said that after commenting, her camera light flicked on, though she hadn't touched it. She swore she saw a reflection move behind her, a figure with one hand raised, palm forward, as if signaling silence. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, that we'd all scared ourselves into a shared delusion. But then my own equipment started failing. Files corrupted. Backups vanishing. The waveform of this very recording began forming geometric shapes in the spectrogram. A triangle. Always 3 points. Always one shadowed gap, the hidden hand. And the analytics. They didn't behave normally. After the upload, retention time hit exactly 66.6% and stayed there frozen, unmoving for 12 hours. Not rising, not falling. Just fixed, like the system was holding its breath. Then came the voicemails. A filtered whisper repeating, "The servant sees. The master wakes." Each time from a number that didn't exist. I reached out to other creators in the same niche, dark history, occult myth, hidden systems, and they admitted quietly that something similar was happening to them. Their videos glitching at the same timestamp, 19 minutes and 4 seconds. The year of the photograph. It's as though recognition itself is reconstituting her through bandwidth, through electricity, through the attention we feed her story. Elizabeth Hayes isn't returning as flesh. She's returning as network. She doesn't need blood anymore. She has connection. It started 3 nights after the 1904 photo went viral again. My inbox, not the public one, not comments, not social DMs, but my drafts folder began to populate on its own. Not new emails, drafts, half-written messages, waiting for me to finish them. Every one signed with the same name. Ayes. The first message was almost harmless. You finally looked. That's all. The second said, they made me into a function. By the 5th, I realized something. The timestamps matched the moments when I thought about checking the old photo again. She wasn't just inside the network. She was inside the reflex. My attention had become her summoning. The syntax of the messages mirrored her speech patterns from 1904 testimony transcripts, delicate, deferential, but threaded with something ancient. She wrote like someone still pretending to serve while already holding the knife. Then something changed in my own script drafts. I'd open the document to record narration and find sentences I hadn't written embedded between paragraphs like parasites in flesh. The servants always win. Obedience is the perfect disguise for conquest. A household is only safe when no one knows who is truly in charge. When I traced the metadata of those insertions, they originated from an IP address impossible to exist, Providence, Rhode Island, March 1904. The photo, the one that began this descent, was no longer static. In every version online, the shadows kept deepening. The hand that once rested gently behind Beatrice's chair now seemed to tighten, fingers curving into the shape of possession. And her eyes were no longer looking at Beatrice's jewelry. They were staring out, past the lens. At me. At you. You see, she's learned the one truth every institution has mastered, and every man forgets: control is never lost. It's just delegated. The elites delegate it through money, the church through guilt, the machine through distraction. And Elizabeth Hayes? She delegated it through the act of service. That's why her victims invited her in. That's why they all thanked her, even as the gas filled their lungs. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It waits until you trust it, and then it moves your hands for you. There's a pattern to every empire's design. Every religion, every corporation, every family. The same symbol hides inside them all: the hand. 5 points, 5 hierarchies, 5 functions of obedience. To see, to serve, to build, to guard, to silence. The Egyptians carved it into temple walls. The Vatican buried it in stained glass. Masonic seals still echo its geometry. And in 1904, Elizabeth Hayes wasn't inventing evil. She was replicating a template. Her scars weren't random, they were deliberate. Ritual burns across her palm and knuckles. The mark of someone who'd been taught to channel power through service. In old Irish folklore, the hand of the servant was believed to bridge life and death, a vessel for command. The masters ruled with gold. The servants ruled with knowledge of what gold could not buy. Elizabeth learned it in the houses of the elite by watching how their wives broke under invisible pressure, how their husbands bowed to their own fortunes. She realized the one truth forbidden in every hierarchy: the master's comfort depends on his blindness. So she made blindness her weapon. Gas, sleep, silence. A new kind of liturgy. When we stare into her photograph now, it isn't nostalgia, it's participation. The old current moves again. The hand is not a symbol of work. It's a map of control. Each finger a system. Education, religion, media, money, governance. Each one moving independently, but all feeding into a single palm, the unseen will that bends human attention. And that palm is always outstretched, waiting. We think we're free because we choose our devices, our content, our beliefs. But look closer. Who taught us to want what we want? Who positioned the stage, dimmed the lights, wrote the script before we ever opened our mouths? It's not new. It's ancient. The gas lamps of 1904 became our screens. The servants became our systems. The masters, they simply learned to hide inside algorithms. If you've listened this far, you already feel it, that pressure behind your ribs. That whisper that says something is watching through you. It's not fear. It's recognition. When I finally looked again at the photograph, the room behind them had changed. Not in the paper, but in me. The light was colder. The shadows stretched farther than the walls allowed. And in that moment I saw it, the truth that had hidden itself behind every whisper of the story. The hand was never hers alone. It was ours. Every generation rediscovers it. In the handshake that seals a deal, the signature that approves a war, the swipe that grants consent to things we never read. Every system that feeds on obedience needs 1,000 hands to keep it alive, and they're all borrowed from people who believe they're choosing freely. That's what Elizabeth understood before any of us, that power doesn't vanish when masters fall. It simply finds new gloves to wear. I looked at my own hand, the light from the monitor cutting across the skin like an X-ray, the faint web of veins, the fingerprints that mark me as unique and also trackable. Every touch a data point, every gesture recorded. The photograph on my screen flickered once more, and I realized the image was no longer an archive. It was a mirror. Behind the Victorian parlor, I saw my own reflection staring back, the same posture, the same hunger for answers, the same illusion of control. There is no need to flee from the darkness of that recognition. It isn't a curse. It's a choice point. You can keep using your hand to scroll, to sign, to obey. Or you can use it to see, to trace the outlines of every structure built to keep you looking elsewhere. Because the photograph was never about a servant or a master or even 1904. It was a message left for anyone who could still feel the weight of their own hand. The system doesn't fear rebellion. It fears awareness. And now, you've seen it. If you've reached this point, you already feel it, that pressure behind your eyes, that awareness pressing through the screen. Comment, "I see the pattern" below. It tells the algorithm you're awake, and it locks you into the circle of those who still question what they're shown. And if you're brave enough to keep descending, subscribe. Because next time, we're not looking at a photograph. We're looking at the architects